together by an artificial war, by a man who really was not a very honorable man. And I'm one of the few who did not like Abraham Lincoln, who found him to be manic depressive, to be Marfan, and created what we call the auto-genocide.
I agree. Oh, absolutely, I agree. I mean, look at his record in terms of setting up martial law, in terms of jailing politicians, in terms of disbanding legislatures. I mean, it was absolutely, he gave us our first income tax, and on and on and on, suspended habeas corpus for people. It was a total dictatorship. And of course, there were factors, as I've pointed out before, there were factors happening in Europe. The competition between agrarian and industrial interests, as well as the consolidation into a nation state. I mean, in Italy, they had a war in 1860 with Garibaldi's army. But I see this same narrative being put out by Biden, even though we've had Hillary Clinton, who's been busted. It was only about a month ago that she was saying Britain needs to stay in the European Union. We had Obama go over there and threaten them, telling them that they're going to get at the back of the line on trade deals if they get out. And so now we see Biden still trying the same old, tired, divisive, divide and conquer. He said he's in Ireland right now, and he says this is going to provide fertile terrain for reactionary politicians and demagogues who are peddling xenophobia, nationalism, isolation, et cetera, okay? That's the way they do this. Nobody was buying that. Nobody's buying that here in America. And Dr. Pieczenik, I think the true multiculturalism is what they've been trying to shut down so much in Europe. Trying to shut down all of these native cultures, this rich tapestry of culture that was European culture. They're trying to subsume that, dumb it down, homogenize it, and overrun it with immigration from the third world. I think that's the true multiculturalism that they despise, I think, is really something that ought to be lifted up.
Well, I agree with you, Paul. Not only is a demagoguery coming out of Biden and Hillary, it's both arrogance and ignorance at the same time. That's why they can no longer really represent the voice of the American people. But let's be even more clear about it. We have had an army that did not have a country. We have sent our boys to war over 30 years into areas which have no national security interest whatsoever to us. Iraq, Afghanistan, Syria. And I was in Syria. I was interrogated there. It was clear to me Bashar Assad could control 80% of the country. He did. We had no need to get involved. And in fact, we have generals who really failed in their performance. But more importantly, we have to hold Congress accountable for all of this and really dissolve Congress. I've seen for the most part, most of these individuals are totally useless. What they've done is to incur a lot of cost on our part. And basically, we've paid more and more money to keep our generals on pension funds than to have active military capability. In fact, now our military is really very poor. And when you see them dispersed all over the world, what you have is Pax Americana. We now have an empire. The republic is dissolving, and that's why we have to reconstitute ourselves to say, no, the republic cannot dissolve. We, the people, will stand by what we want, but we do not want expansions into areas that we have no interest whatsoever. And instead, we want to get into effective trade negotiations, as Trump has been talking about, and build up our own infrastructure. The truth of the matter is that, for the most part, Europe was finished right after World War II. When FDR was quite brilliant, what he did was to pit the Nazis against the Soviet Union so that we could arise, we, the United States, a capitalist country, could become a formidable superpower. And we did. Our legacy then went downhill. After the Vietnam War, it continued to go downhill. We went into wars that we had no need to go into. Our brave soldiers were restricted from doing what they needed to do because of incompetent generals, incompetent leaders, and incompetent POTUSes. You know, we glorify JFK, but at the same time, we don't talk about the fact he had Addison's disease. He was totally incompetent. He had to be on drugs. He had to be on steroids. He should never have been president. Same thing with LBJ, who did false flags on the Liberty, who did the Gulf of Tonkin, a totally false flag there, and the same thing with Nixon, Reagan, Bush. I mean, each one had their own major problems. It wasn't a question Republican or Democrat. It was a question that we no longer needed a president of the United States of America. That was a fallacious concept. It's outdated now. With the internet and cyber nation, we no longer need that.
Oh, absolutely. And if we look at talking about Texas becoming independent, if we look at the population of Texas, it's 10 times bigger than the original 13 colonies combined when they got their independence. And we have energy self-sufficiency and other issues. We'd be one of the largest economies in the world if we were on our own. I want to ask you about where you think this is going to, what's going to happen in the next couple of years, because this is going to be a very long and protracted process. We've got a lot of different countries where there is a rising movement. And I think it's important to point out this is not all on the right. It was ignored pretty much by our press earlier in the week because I think they didn't want to give any momentum to Brexit. But the fact that they had the first woman mayor in Rome, some people talked about the fact, hey, they got the first woman mayor. But the real issue was that she was a populist, that she was an anti-globalist, and she wasn't even a person on the right. This party is very much a left-wing environmentalist party, but they are anti-populist. And so I look at that and I say, I think that's a strong indication that Donald Trump can win some of the people who are thinking who are Bernie Sanders supporters. And this is not just right-wing extremism and xenophobia, as they point out. It's people understanding that they're getting a very bad deal from this. How do you think this is going to play out? I mean, certainly, Paul was right. They're going to use everything that goes wrong to demonize this. They're going to try to bring back a second referendum. We'll talk about that when we come back, Dr. Pieczenik. I want to get your thoughts on that.
Sure.
We're talking about, you mentioned Catalonia, Basque, probably getting independence. Now Scotland is saying, hey, we want to try that one more time as well. So this is not done. They're still fighting, and there is a wounded beast right now on the loose, and that is the globalist. We're going to be right back with Dr. Steve Pieczenik. Stay with us. Welcome back to the Alex Jones Show. I'm David Knight, and we're talking to Dr. Steve Pieczenik. We're talking about the consequences of Brexit. What is going to happen next? We've talked about how there's a moving independence movement. People want control of their government. They want government to be closer to them. And yet what we see happening is both in Brussels and in Washington. We see a government that is increasingly distant from the people, increasingly arrogant. And even though they are less and less attuned to what we want them to do, they are talking very loudly to us, managing the smallest details of our lives. Before I go back to Dr. Pieczenik, I want to point out that we have a new special. We have Deep Cleanse, 20% off. And, of course, that is the Rolls-Royce of cleansers that we have here. It is an all-in-one cleanser, our fastest-selling product. It's a new special we have at InfoWarsLife.com. Also, we have the 20% off the Alexa Pure water filters. Every one of the filters, from the largest to the smallest, are 20% off. And then there's the huge sale that we have at InfoWarsStore.com on the Hillary for Prison T-shirts. You can get the first one for 50% off. There'll also be a link where you can sign up for our free newsletter. If you do that, you can get additional shirts at 75% off. So that's a huge savings. 75% off unlimited Hillary for Prison T-shirts if you sign up for our free newsletter. And, of course, that has unique content. That's a good thing anyway. I mean, it's got specials in it all the time for those people that are unique, short specials, as well as unique content that you won't see on our website. That's a free newsletter that you can sign up for there. I want to go back to Dr. Pieczenik. How do you see this breaking out in terms of some of these other countries that may be suing for their independence, Dr. Pieczenik?
Well, it's very interesting, David. I think you pointed out quite a few. The first one, ironically, that will probably split is Belgium itself, which has never really been an integrated country. It's been divided between the Walloons and the Flemish. In other words, the French-speaking and the Flemish. They don't really get along. They've had a very hard time getting a prime minister or a president. And ironically, Brussels became the very center of an ethereal concept called the EU. So from the very beginning, when I saw the concept of EU being stationed in Brussels, I said, this is doomed to failure. So I think Belgium is going to break up. I think Luxembourg, anything that has to do with financial systems that depend on England will do very poorly. Now, let me explain why. One of the reasons why Obama came over to the EU, as usual, it was at the beck and call of our bankers on Wall Street. not our regional bankers. This is about Wall Street bankers, because I think our regional and local banks are exceedingly in good shape because they have huge reserves of dollars. What's happening to Wall Street is because they're so lazy and so greedy, they didn't want to build the infrastructure required to go through all these countries, the Netherlands, Germany, Poland, Luxembourg, and France, and instead relied on England. England had a 24/7 position of financial capability, which could trade all the way from Asia to the Middle East. That's going to go away. So the American banking system, the large elements, have to be involved, have to really redirect and put money into the infrastructure of banking all over. So I think Belgium will break apart. Spain will break apart. Because from the very beginning, when I first wrote the books in Op Center 20 years ago, I used Catalan and the Basque region and Barcelona in particular to say they are not Spanish and they do not belong with Madrid. From there, I would say Luxembourg will be dissolved. I have a dog yelling.
I hear him in the background. Can you stay with us another segment, or you have to go?
Yeah. No.
All right. We're going to come back right after the top of the hour. We'll be back with Dr. Steve Pieczenik. Stay with us. Welcome back to the Alex Jones Show. I'm David Knight, and we're talking to Dr. Steve Pieczenik. He was gracious enough to remain on for this one more segment. The next segment, we're going to have Alex Jones with another report talking about what is happening today. Of course, this is a huge seismic change. Dr. Pieczenik has been talking about this, and I've got an article here in front of me from his website, stevepieczenik.com, going back to this last Monday, talking about how urging people to vote for Brexit, breaking down the origins, as he sees it, of the European Union and the issues before us. And it's been a very interesting conversation with Dr. Pieczenik. You were just talking about the different countries, Dr. Pieczenik, that you think will break up. A lot of people have said they believe, in terms of those that might be leaving the European Union, one of the first candidates would be Sweden, because they've been essentially politically in agreement with Britain. They see Britain as a counterweight, and the only counterweight to a dominant Germany. So with Britain gone, Sweden had said that they'd be likely to go. And I think it would be easier for them to get out because they did not adopt the euro, just as Britain did not. A lot of these countries that would like to leave now are going to have a much more difficult time of it because they've foolishly abandoned their own currencies.
Well, it's interesting, David. I think you're right on. I'm looking at Sweden. Sweden will leave because, first, it has a problem with the immigrants coming in.
Yes.
Secondly, the point that you made, which is an excellent point, was the fact that this is not a right-wing switch to Sweden. It will be a left-wing switch because it's a socialist government. It basically has to come to terms with the fact that it can no longer depend on the European Union and has to really in some way create its own viable economy. Mm-hmm. The one place in the Scandinavian countries that really has to decide what they want to do is Norway. Norway has been very efficient and effective in producing oil and garnering a lot of oil and a lot of kroners. And basically they have been investing not in Europe, but they have one of the major investors in the United States. They're exceedingly quiet. They don't say anything about their investments. And like the Dutch, who are also very quiet investors, we're going to have a problem in the Netherlands because the Netherlands can no longer take care of all the immigrants that have come in. And I assume that in Texas, you've seen a lot of Dutch farmers come in because they can no longer use the Netherlands or Holland as a basis for farming, and instead they've come into Montana, Texas, and other areas where they can buy up huge milk farms, and they become very efficient. So the Netherlands will have to break out and decide what they want to do. But we have to remember the Netherlands they have been very effective, the Dutch, for over 350 years in trading overseas. So they have a history unlike anyone else. Poland will have a problem. Poland can no longer really remain inside the EU without the cover of England, and Poland is exceedingly afraid of Germany. And of course, as we know, the history of World War II starts with Germany invading Poland. Mm-hmm. Germany's currency will ironically probably convert to the Deutschmark. If I were Germany, I'd automatically convert to the Deutschmark because the euro has no value in and of itself. It really depends on the strength of the Frankfurt Bank. Austria will probably also break out because it's aligned with Germany, and Hungary will probably break out as well because they're extremely